continuation. The history between those 2 pages explains why. It encompasses the events of the empire change over and that of the Maccabees.
So just for those who didn't do yesterday's Daniel, we're on chapters 10 to 12, doing part 2 of the book of Daniel, not so much from a what is needed for salvation angle, which is the purpose of the Genesis to Revelation studies over the year, but because there's not much of salvation or personal salvation in the book of Daniel, I'm covering this history. So yesterday we ended with the words, in fact we do not see Rome, which is the last of the 4th empires that Daniel saw in his statue in chapter 2. We do not see, so we saw Babylon, Media, Persia and Greece in those thus far. We're now seeing going to deal with the 4th empire. In the New Testament it's the 4th empire, but the 4th empire doesn't come into being in the book of Daniel because it's future to Daniel, but now it is past to us. So yesterday's study ended with these words. In fact, we do not see Rome ruling Israel until the New Testament. Prior to then, Israel succumbed to idol worship in the Old Testament. 400 years later, between the last pages of the Old Testament, which is the book of Malachi, and the first of the New, the Gospel of Matthew, we see they have overcome this temptation. So when we start at Matthew, you see there's no idol worship. In fact, they've gone a bit too far to the other side, where the Pharisees or the leaders have imposed strict rules about what you can and cannot do to comply with the law of Moses, or the law of God that they received through Moses. So the law says the 4th commandment was thou shalt not do any work, for example, and they will think that carrying your bed or plucking corn on the Sabbath day when you're hungry was breaking the law, which is what they accused the apostles, Jesus' disciples, of doing. So, okay, so that's where we are. So today's part 2 carries on from the 2nd paragraph of the writing on the screen. The history between those 2 pages explains why. So continuing from there.
I strongly urge you to read about them for an understanding of Daniel. Israel's rejection of God and his laws set in motion the events that allowed for Gentile nations to gain control of Israel. It was Israel's continued rejection that eventually ushered in Rome and their destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I can recommend some books for those of you who wish to check the historic accuracy of Daniel 11, but I will not bore the rest of you with it. With this background knowledge of the struggles, one can better understand the New Testament verses as why Rome had a policy of appeasing the Jews by releasing a prisoner, Barabbas, on one of their feast days. Why in Luke 23:12, Pilate and Herod, both Romans, yet were enemies and needed a common cause, found in Yeshua to become friends. And why Jews were not permitted to crucify anyone nor take action against a Roman. However, I will give some explanation of some translated verses that have led to misinterpretation and using the King James's version. Verse 5 says, who are kings of north and south? Yeshua, speaking in Matthew 12:42, gives a clue. He says, the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. Of course, he was speaking of Queen of Sheba, who came from a land to the south of Israel. There are literal directions north and south, as confirmed in Acts 8:26, 27:12, and Revelations 21:13. Syria and Egypt are the countries spoken of in reference to the kingdoms of the north and south. Syria lies north of Israel, while Egypt lies to the south. After Alexander's empire was divided among his 4 generals, Ptolemy obtained rulership of Egypt and named himself king of the south. Seleucus gained Babylon Upper Syria and other territories which became known as the North. The references to the king of the north and of the south are not for an individual king, but a line of kings ruling over the northern and southern empires, i.e. Syria and Egypt. When reading chapter 11, one must be careful to examine the context of the prophecy, the use of personal pronouns, and history of the period in determining exactly to which king of the north and of the south the sentence refers. For example, the kings referred to in verse 6 is not the same kings referred to in verse 5. The king of the north was Antiochus II, while the king of the south was Ptolemy II. They were constantly at war with each other and finally settled their differences through a matrimonial alliance, exactly as prophecy said. However, alliances can be broken or were broken, new marriages were made, heirs were poisoned or murdered in other ways. History confirms the taking of gods by Ptolemy as well as a financial bounty back to Egypt as predicted in verses 7 to 10. See also Isaiah chapters 46 verse 1, Jeremiah 48 verse 7, 49 verse 3, and 1 Samuel chapters 4 verses 1 to 2 regarding taking a conquered nation's gods. Remember when Jacob ran away from Laban, one of his daughters or his wives, Laban's daughters also did the same. In verse 10, the emphasis is changed from sons to son, and Josiah III was also called the Great. Verse 14, where it says robbers, in robbers of thy people, it does not mean a thief nor one who robs. It is actually an amalgamated translation of two Hebrew words into one English, robber. The Hebrew words mean to break through or burst open. In common, it is used in reference to a burglar or a robber. Hence, the English used the common usage translation. In short, Strong's Concordance has it as a tyrant or violent son of a family name. A Jewish Bible translates verse 14 as, and the more violent one among your own people will rebel. And I said the King James Version has it as robbers of thy people. Some of the Jews wanted to fight against the oppression of the Gentiles, unlike the pious ones who accepted their plight. Unfortunately, the attempts of the robbers of thy people, the violent ones, were squashed. Today, such are called zealots, or terrorists, some others. They, for example, are ones who voted to fight, defend themselves on a Sabbath rather than be killed. Verse 16 mentions glorious land is of course Israel. Verse 31, referring to taken away the daily, corresponds with chapter 8:11 daily. Summarizing the historical events of chapter 11, inclusive of verse 14, we have Daniel was told that the precise length of the Medo-Persian Empire had been fixed. He was also told that the three kings, including the fourth, would be very wealthy and would be a certainty. History verifies the literal fulfillment of this prophecy. The prophecy was given during the reign of Cyrus, which is in Daniel 11 verse 1. The kings who immediately followed were Ahasuerus in Ezra chapter 4 verse 6, Artaxerxes, Ezra 4 verse 7, Darius, Ezra 4 verse 24, and Xerxes, that's Xerxes in Esther chapter 1 verse 1. The events can be confirmed with the history right down to the last verse of 45, and that says, shall he come to his end, and none shall help him. After the last humiliating defeat of Antiochus by Rome, he again tried to raise money for an army. Limited by the huge controlling taxes of Rome had put on him, he attempted to rob the temple of Jupiter Belessus at Elymus, but was surprised by the Persians and killed. However, future event speculators wish to switch the message of Daniel 11 to the future coming of the Antichrist. To achieve this, they use Antiochus as a typology for him. In other words, it's a natural actual historical event, but Christians and futuristic people like to put the event in sometime in the future because they don't know the Jewish history and they can't understand the passage. The usage of the word Antichrist to indicate a single individual or world ruler did not come about until the writings of the early church fathers, and the term was applied to the new heretical teachers.
Now when I say church fathers, I'm not talking about the biblical ones, I mean the Christian formation ones of the Catholic Church and so forth.
Leaders of the Roman Empire and even to the popes by the Protestants. The usage of the word finally took on the popular connotation of one world leader would rise at the end of days. In other words, we believe in a tradition rather than the Bible, what the Bible actually means. Scripture refers to a final world ruler as the beast in Revelation 11 verse 7 and other scriptures, but not as the Antichrist.
So we shall continue part 3 and the last part of Daniel, chapters 10 to 12 tomorrow. Shalom.